Welcome to the Messy City Podcast, where we talk about creating the kinds of always changing, wonderfully messy cities and towns that we humans clearly love. We'll talk with those people trying to revive them or create them anew, whether they be designers, developers, builders, planners, or just anyone interested in the conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. This is Kevin Klinkenberg.
This is Abby Newsham, and you are listening to Upzoned. We are doing a collaborative episode.
What podcast are we on today?
We're on the Upzoned podcast.
I think so. So I'm a guest on your podcast
That's
today.
right.
All right.
Exactly.
No, I'm good. I'm totally good with that. I think that'll work. We are really lucky, Abby, to have a third guest in the studio visiting Kansas City for a few days. Jim Heid, author of, I wrote this down, Jim. He has a new book called Building Small, a toolkit for real estate entrepreneurs, civic leaders, and great communities. So, Jim, we're delighted to have you. I think this is going to be a really fun conversation.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here and get a twofer out of this. So this is
Totally.
great. It's great.
I know, this is great. So very thankful. We had a chance to meet last night at Abby's monthly meetup for small developers of KC, and Jim was our speaker, which was really cool. And this is one of those funny areas where there's like so much overlap in people we all know and have worked with together. And yet Jim and I have never met in person before. And I could tell by like the slides you chose and everything. It's like that. We obviously have a lot of similar friends and interests.
Right.
So
it'd be nice to know all the mutual friends as we're talking with people. I mean, Bernice Radel happened to be in town with Neighborhood Evolution. She's here for a completely different reason, but you guys got the opportunity to connect and obviously have tons of mutual friends. So it is kind of funny when all these worlds collide.
Yeah.
Well, and there does seem to be all these alternative universes going on, or parallel universes going on right now. And everybody's using similar language, focusing on the same ideas, creating the same levels of impact, maybe a little different gateway in terms of how they get there or how they're conveying their messages. But yeah, it's pretty exciting that there is this much convergence around this idea.
Yeah. So I want to promote what you're doing. I also want to talk about a little bit about your background that you explained last night, which I think is really interesting for a lot of people. But first, talk about like the reason you're in town is because you're doing these small scale developer forums, which you've done a number of around the country. So let's talk about what that is real quick.
Yeah, so this is so for 12 years, I've been doing these things called the Small Scale Developer Forum, and it started out as a bit of an experiment to see if there were other people that felt like I did about this, crafted, more personal, authentic kinds of development. That was what I think one of our attendees called urban acupuncture, where you do these surgical strikes in neighborhoods that start to change the character of the neighborhood in a good way. Help support the local economy. And also, I think for those of us that want to get our hands dirty and love the built environment, get an opportunity to express ourselves. Fast forward 12 years later, we'll be doing our 22nd one in Kansas City in October, 20 through 22. It's really, it's become a personal passion for me and just one of the greatest things I get to do, go to a different city, stitch together all of these amazing people that are doing incredible work, share that with people because the audience is from all over the country. We rarely have very many people local. So it's a chance for outsiders to come in, see cities that they wouldn't normally go to. And as I was telling Abby yesterday, I was joking about it at our last conference. It's like the Hemispheres magazine, 3 perfect days. So this is like 2 perfect days. If you were a small developer, what would you want to see? So it's this highly curated trip and experience that combines both case studies, tours, panels, and a lot of networking and social, just casual social connection between the attendees. So over the the arc of these, we've built this network of people who are really supporting each other. People are starting to do deals together. And the thing that I hear the most is I finally found my tribe. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. One thing I was going to ask you last night, and we just got all wrapped up in time and everything, but one of the when I went out working on my own initially in like 1999, one of the very first people I worked with was John Anderson. I don't know if you ever worked with or knew John well when I was in California.
Yeah, well, who doesn't know John Anderson?
Exactly.
So yes, I know John. He was in Northern California at the time, again, another one of these parallel universes. We were just our last forum, or 2 forums ago, was in Savannah, and we toured a project that he was intimately involved in the beginning, kind of the conceptual design, and a little cottage court that was pretty sweet, pretty cleverly done. So
that's really cool. So actually, the very first New Urbanist design charrette I did was with John in Truckee, California.
Oh, wow!
For a really fun project that never got realized. It was a greenfield development in Truckee. But then later, on that charrette, Dan Perolic and I met in '99. That was the first time we worked together. And then Dan and I worked with John to design the dough mill project.
Really? Sure.
Yeah. So we did, we worked collaboratively on the master plan and the architecture and all that, which was just a lot of fun especially when I was a young gun then. And it was, I give John a hard time. It was like really low paying work and everything else, but it was really rewarding to see that all come to fruition. So many fun overlaps. So it's cool to meet you. I do want you to talk a little bit about your background. You're originally a landscape architect, which I thought was interesting. So talk a little bit about how trace your career from landscape architecture to actually getting into development.
Yeah. So trained as a landscape architect, University of Idaho, actually. And I think like a lot of landscape architects of that era, nobody started in landscape architecture because nobody knew what it was. I mean, the profession has certainly found a much higher mantle now in the discussion than it was then. Ended up there after a couple of other false starts in other programs or things, and like a lot of us that are landscape architects joke about, we probably would have been an architect, but we couldn't do the math. so ended up there. But actually, I'm very fortunate and very glad that I did, because I think the thing about our landscape architecture that really taught me is systems thinking, contextual response. I think it is a more collaborative profession, less about the object and more about, the community. Yeah. And so it really laid.
Man, that's like the most polite critique of architecture I've ever heard.
You're very diplomatic.
I've been working on it for a while. Yeah. Anyway, so worked, in the profession, doing a variety of scales of projects. A lot of stuff first job was actually in Vermont, and worked for a number of years doing like urban design, infill projects, stuff like that. Went to New Orleans, which in many ways was probably the place that I really learned about neighborhoods and grain and fabric. Worked for 5 years in downtown New Orleans. It was such a rich environment for understanding just great residential architecture and communities and really new urbanism before. It was just about when the new urbanism was kind of getting started. And then went west and started working on large planned communities, like I was showing in the slides last night. But it was about that point that I jokingly say I was frustrated that most of the stuff I was drawing wasn't getting built. And it was like, okay, and I'm tired of having always to explain it, so I'm just going to be my own client. And so I went back and did the real estate master's program. And came out and went back into consulting, but found that I had a whole different set of tools and language, and frankly, empathy for our clients. Not all the clients, but really understanding the challenges that they were facing. And in fact, I remember that seminal moment when I went to grad school, and I'm sitting in the classroom like, I've worked at these great firms and I've got this great pedigree in design, and this is going to be. And within 3 days, I realized how little I knew, because we were doing finance and we were doing, IRs. And it's like, I don't know any of that stuff. And so suddenly realized that design is like, in the world of development, unfortunately, it's about 20% of the solution set. And
totally.
And so there was this need, to really understand. So anyway, so did that, and then finally decided, started doing side projects, a lot of people, side hustles, renovations, little projects to get my hands dirty and learn the process, and then kind of grew from there into doing like full on projects, where you're actually really signing a personal guarantee and having to negotiate with the bank and all the other fun stuff. So.
Yeah. I'd love to talk more about design, because that was something that you emphasized in your presentation last night. And the three of us are people who are designers and come from that perspective and background. And in the development world, I think what a lot of people in communities push back on, a lot of it is the result of the design of the project. Can you talk a little bit more about why design is such an important piece of like the small scale development puzzle?
Yeah, I mean, I am, and I'm increasingly passionate and distraught about where a lot of this stuff is headed. So, as I mentioned last night, one of the things I'm really pleased about is the book that you mentioned, Kevin, has become kind of a textbook for a lot of the emerging developer programs, or the people just getting into the profession, which is great. But the more I engage with those, I realize how little those programs are teaching about design, because it's all about financial transactions. How do you get the money? How do you structure the money? How do you get the money paid back? And I understand that's important, but I think that we're continually missing the opportunities for great design. In fact, one of the little anecdotes from the forum, it was 2 or 3 forums ago, we went and we presented this group that was doing some really incredible work in terms of training young developers. And there was a panel of them, and they were talking about their projects. And one of them said, I'm working through this and I'm grinding through the thing, and I'm waiting, I'm going to get my first couple of projects done, and I can't wait until I can really hire an architect. And I said, somebody in the audience says, what do you mean you had hired architects? Like, oh, well, that's a luxury I can't afford right now. And their response was, no, that's a luxury you can't not afford to buy, and you should be having that. And so I think there's this, in the pursuit of trying to solve the incredible barriers that the capital markets have put up, design just kind of gets left behind. And yet I think it is both the way to create greater value at less cost. But there is also talk a lot about the responsibility we have as developers to contribute to the public realm and to contribute to the community character and context that we're working in. And I think all of that's really been forgotten about. So,
yeah, both of you, Kevin, I mean, you guys have both done development projects. And I think sometimes you hear from the development community that design costs too much, not just hiring an architect, but doing things that are considered good design principles. I'm curious from both of you, what principles you think are really important for small scale development that are not, it's not about adding a bunch of money to the project and making something extravagant, but really simple design solutions that small developers should be thinking about.
That's a great question, Abby. I'll take a quick stab at it and let Jim kind of percolate on it for a minute. But I think the best designers and architects that I have worked with or seen work best at the small scale. And what they can do, what a good designer can bring, is to really, as Jim kind of alluded to, add incredible or find incredible value on small sites in particular that other designers or developers are just not able to see. And so that's one reason that I have always personally enjoyed working on the difficult sites that other people passed up.
Yeah.
Because development is like a lot of businesses where people do follow the leader a lot, and there becomes a tendency to just kind of create widgets and pump out the same widgets. And if you can escape that mentality and learn how to manipulate buildings and spaces on small sites, it's amazing how much more value you can create that other people just don't see. And so, that's probably where I would go with that.
Yeah. And you make an interesting point. I think there are those two ends of the industry where, people are building, and I often talk to my tagline is, building community, not commodity. Mm-hmm. And I think there are a lot of people in the industry that are just about, okay, I've solved it once. Now let me find 10 more sites like that so I can just continue trading on it. Versus a lot of the people that are in the small scale developer forum are coming from a design background. We have a lot of architects as developers. And I think, they love the craft of building something that's really, that looks good and belongs. And so to your point, what are some of the principles? I think contextually responsive is really important, and it doesn't mean that it has to just blend in. I mean, I have kind of a love-hate relationship with a lot of the new urbanism because I think it's slavishly historic, and there's ways, and with the project I showed last night in Charleston, that really respects all the principles of grain and scale, but is clearly a contemporary building that belongs there. So I think there is an opportunity to create those interventions that are actually pretty stunning and can really make the block that much more exciting. And then there are places where you do want to just be the background building and you want to fit in. And I think designers need to understand, which time and place you're working in on that particular location. So I think and the other piece about design is where it can add value, because, there's a lot of volatility in construction costs. There's a lot of volatility in interest rates, but the biggest thing is getting something approved. And the biggest risk isn't getting something approved. And so I talk a lot, and another one of the lessons from the forum, what I learned, and this was after our trip to Nashville, the gateway to small scale development is, if you're in a high barrier to entry market, is through design. Because what Kevin was just saying, how to create value and find the hacks that actually optimize what can be done on that site and do something pretty special. And the market's always there. The low barrier to entry markets we found was really people coming through a brokerage environment, because they're out on the frontier. They know where the favored quarter is. They know how to negotiate deals. And so there was this really interesting comparison and contrast of how people get into the business and how they find their way. But I think leading with design, is a really important opportunity. And again, responsibility. So
yeah, I'm reminded of a project I worked on years ago. That we were actually, my old company and we were going to be the developer on. It was an infill project here in Kansas City, Abby, and in the Longfellow neighborhood. And we were able to help the neighborhood association acquire some vacant property, and then worked with them to say, well, if we design something that you would like, would you sell it to us, basically? So we did sort of a charrette process with them. And the interesting thing, Jim, thinking about that, is like they started out, of course, like a lot of neighborhoods, they just wanted like single family houses.
Right.
And to kind of repeat, that pattern in the neighborhood. And on this site, that was a little less than an acre, we ended up and we knew that doing single family houses alone was going to be difficult. The market was going to be tough. We weren't sure it was really going to pencil out. We ended up coming up with sort of a courtyard design that had a mixture of unit types and 18 units overall on a little less than an acre, nothing over 2 stories. And the neighborhood loved it. They absolutely loved it. And they sold the property to us. We had an agreement to develop it. And then, of course, the recession hit, the financial crisis hit, and the whole thing just went away. It's still vacant.
Yeah, it's not too late.
But it's half of it is a community garden now. But it was interesting. It was like, to that point, it was like using design to get there. And you showed that last night with your discussion of the cottage court project that you worked on. And so talk a little bit about like how you use design during that process to get the community over the hump to do something that was not necessarily like approved by right.
Yeah, and I think I have a line that I use in talking about small scale development and what we do as small scale developers, and it's to say to get the community to ask for better, and meaning helping them understand what better looks like, because I think a lot of them don't like what they're getting, but they also, the reference point is what they've gotten, and they're not willing to open the opportunity to try something different. So it's like, totally. we don't want that anymore, but I don't know, I've never seen that before, and how's that going to work? And frankly, that cottage court grew out of a year of policy work in the community. And those meetings that I like to call stump the chop. Well, what if, there's this party and who's going to park there? And, everybody creates all these scenarios. And finally, it's like, okay, I'm going to start worrying about writing policy. We'll just go build something. And then they'll say, oh, that's what you mean. That's great. And so that's kind of what happened. But we did use pretty effectively, and there was a personal passion to do something that, I could really be proud of. So a lot of design, a lot of the landscape architecture, I think, came into that because it was not about the buildings. It was about the spaces between the buildings and how that created a total composition. And, working with Dan Prolik and his team was great because they have that really wonderful way of illustrating things that give it enough character without making people start focusing on, well, I'm not sure I like that overhang, or what kind of windows are those going to be? They understand the mass and the form, and there's enough without it telling too much. So the ability to illustrate what we were trying to do and then equally compare and contrast it to what the codes actually wanted, and then be able to show those two like from the same vantage point was a very, very effective tool. And it's, two dumb, simple graphics. It's the kind of snout house garage facing the street, which is what the codes wanted, and then the cottage court. And I mean, there wasn't anybody in the room when they saw those two side by side that said, oh no, we want the snout house. So it was pretty easy at that point to then get the community to say, oh, okay, so what do we have to do to get there? And then that opens the door to say, okay, well, we've got to be a little more creative with the codes. We can't be administering it to the letter of the law. We have to meet the intent, but let's think about how we can work at it differently. So.
Yeah, it reminds me. I mean, I loved it when you showed the different options last night. It reminded me of another John Anderson story of all things, but a charrette we were on together in Michigan briefly. In the early days of new urbanism. And so at that time period, we weren't really quite sure always how to get over the hump in terms of convincing the audience. So we had a grand idea that we were going to have here's our plan for how this greenfield development is going to be. And we're going to do a drawing of what it will happen if nothing changes with the typical development pattern in that area. And we spent a lot of time, drawing out a beautiful, suburban sprawl type of plan. And then during the course of that charrette, there had been a dog, hanging out with us. Like somebody's dog was hanging out the whole time during that charrette. Super quiet, very chill dog, just kind of hanging out with everybody, not making a peep. So somebody sent that file to the plotter to start printing out the sprawl plan, and the dog starts barking at it.
Not even the dog.
The dog knew.
Yeah. So forever afterwards, whenever we had that opportunity in a charrette, we called it we're going to do the dog bark plan. Yeah. So, this was, the really crappy thing that you're going to get if you don't change anything. And, by the way, it wasn't always effective. Sometimes people liked it.
Well, I thought that was going to be the punchline that people. I had one of my early mentors in the profession said, "You never do a plan that you don't like, because that's usually the one the client takes." Totally. And it's because you do the 3 and you always do the sandbag, which is the worst one, and one time out of 3, that's the one they want, and then they're like, "How do you do that?" So
I know it's kind of crazy. I did want to ask you a little bit more about the cottage court project. So the one you did, there was a for sale project.
That's correct.
And you said it wasn't condos. It was like a fee simple structure. So one of the things we've talked a lot about in regards to cottage court projects in recent years is for sale versus for rent. And I'm curious, if you had that to do again, would you pursue that as just make the whole thing a for rent project, or would you still do it as a for sale deal?
Yes and no. So the where that project is located, the economics made no sense to keep as for rent, because it's a very upside down. So just in rough math, to sell it, we sold at about $1,000 a square foot. To keep it for rent, the imputed land value would be about $600 a square foot. Mm-hmm. So it's just there's such a big difference in terms of demand for sale and ownership versus what you can get in rent. It's very kind of imbalanced. So, but I would prefer to do one for rent, because for all the other reasons that you do rental, or be able to do some kind of a mixture where you could get some ownership. I think, there are a lot of, I paid a high tuition on that project. I learned a lot. And so I'd like to be able to like capture some of that value by taking the lessons learned about what was really good value and worth going to the mat for, and what, was probably cost me a lot more than I should have spent and didn't need to do. So I really want to be able to trade on that again. The other thing was that we ended up doing for sale and doing single family detached fee simple lots, because that was the hack by using the as of right code. And if we had wanted to do some duplexes, I mean, we did use the ADUs as the way to get a little more granularity and a little more product size variation in there. But I would love to have been able to do, in fact, the aggressive scheme that I showed, which we called kind of the, our most aggressive scheme, it included like a manor house, a couple of duplexes, and it would have been required a lot more entitlement processing. And staff, frankly, weren't sure they could support that. And since it was an infill neighborhood, it's like, okay, what are you going to, is it really going to be worth the battle? So.
Well, and I think it's important to add the context that this is in California.
Yes.
And I mean, I know process and entitlements is a challenge for small developers everywhere. California is almost like its own world.
The only place it's worse is Hawaii, but yes.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about what that approval process looked like in California? Would you do it in California again if you were to do another cottage court project? Would you, what are the kinds of regulatory procedural environments that you would be looking for?
Yeah, well, that could be a whole hour in itself. And I'll cover that quickly. But what I do think is encouraging is California, in like so many cases, is leading the way on some pretty heavy legislative from the top down to try and break the back of some of these things. And I'm involved in some projects now, which is pretty interesting to see, is that going to work? But to your question, I'll summarize it this way. So I had a lot of people come out and they say, so how long did that project take? And I said, well, from acquisition to first occupancy was 5 years. And if it's one of my developer friends, they say, for 8 units, 5 years? You got to be kidding me. And if it's somebody from the public sector, they say, 5 years? Really? That's all? That's really pretty fast. So there's, first of all, there's this very different mindset about what, how fast things should move. But there's an environmental review process. There's, a lot of public approval and discretionary approvals. There's a lot of latitude and just things that can happen at the planning commission, the staff level, and all that. So, and that's what some of the recent legislation. So I don't know if you've heard about the thing called Builder's Remedy, which is a very interesting tool that the state has had for a long time, but they got very serious about it in this last cycle. So I was just in Florida recently doing a talk, and they were talking about I think it's the local housing law that Santa signed, and they're complaining about how difficult it is. And so California for years has had this process called you have to do your housing plan or housing element. The state tells you how many units you have to build in your community within a given cycle, and it's usually 8 years. And then you have to present a plan to the state of how you're going to do that, which means you have to have enough land zoned, and you have to have the tools and policies that actually allow that to happen. And it used to be kind of a rubber stamp thing. People would do it. They didn't really do it with any seriousness. In this last cycle, given the crisis, the state said, no, this is serious. And if you don't have the plan in and approved on time, your zoning and your general plan goes null and void. So now you have the tools that usually would be the things that would be the gauntlet that you would run go sterile until they actually get an adopted plan. So I was able to actually get another cottage court vested under that in that window before the plan got approved. And so I thought, okay, so now a lot of the things that I ran into before don't matter. But then there are other things. It's like, well, there's a carve out if they can find a health and safety nexus between what they want you to do and what, would be in the zoning. So there's all these, death by 1,000 cuts, and it just goes on and on. And so, and I think that's both the the challenges and the agility that comes with being a small developer is you have that tenacity to continue to work through that. It's like, okay, well, no, what do I have to do? And okay, how about if I do this? Versus the bigger institutional developers, they're just going to hire an attorney and they're going to run up the legal bills, and you can't afford to do that. So you get to know the codes and you get to figure out how to work through that. But it takes a long time. It's a lot of processing. It's a lot of frustration. I think the biggest frustration I have is, and it happened with the first cottage court that I showed you, is you're excited about it. You feel like I'm doing what the community wanted. This is what we've read about. And you go in and you show it to staff and you're waiting to say, yes, that's what we've been wanting, And I'm like, well, yeah, but you didn't meet, section 204.3. And it's like, where's the collaboration? Where's the moral support? So, and I get it. They can't, show any deference, but I wish there was a little more excitement that if you're trying to do the right thing, there'd be a little bit more excitement and a little more embracing of, we want to see this happen. And
it's unfortunate that there's not much of a distinction between corporate developers and entrepreneurial developers. And there's a lot of reasons for that, obviously. But I think you alluded last night to the point that it's basically the same headache to do a big project as a small. So if you're going to be a small developer, there's a lot more reasons than money to get into it.
Yeah. So, one thing I'm curious about, I'm curious about like your advice to younger people, especially. So let's take a hypothetical person, like, let's call her Abby. And let's say, this hypothetical Abby wants to like start doing development projects. And do you try to advise people to like keep your day job, do it as a side hustle, or is it something like just jump right in and do a project? How do you talk about that with like younger people when you're encouraging them to get into small scale stuff?
Yeah, because it does come up a lot. And I think, and everybody's different, but I would say keep your day job, because it takes a while. It always takes longer and always costs more. And it's nice to not be, worrying about how you're going to pay the bills or put food on the table or whatever else. So, and I think start small. I mean, I have a lot of, young, ambitious developers or wannabe developers, and they show up and I've got this, mixed use project and, it's on 2 acres and I'm going to do this. And I read about this green thing and I want to use mass timber and all that. It's like, no, like buy a duplex, renovate it, learn how to get permits, learn how to get a C of O, go through the process of managing a budget and all that kind of stuff and get some income and round trip it. And then, keep working towards that, because it's just I think a lot of people that are interested in small development for all the right reasons, they're visionary, they love the craft, they want to make a difference, they're intellectually curious about things. They, went to the last whatever conference it was and they come back all fired up and they don't realize how hard this is. So I think it's better to do small bites, especially if you're young and you've got the ability to continue to grow, build the skill set. The other thing that I tell them then, and I do a program called Small Coach, which is for small emerging developers, and it's kind of the life lessons. It's not the, okay, how do you write a pro forma and what's a set of drawings? It's like, how do you manage your life and keep it in balance when you're a developer? And how do you intentionally take the time to reflect and capture the lessons on that first project that then builds the infrastructure and the IP that you can take to your next project and to your next, because I think so many people are very task oriented and they just want to get through it. And then the next time the project comes up, and I'm like, what did I do wrong last time? How did I forget that? So I think if you're young and you're in this profession, it's about building the playbook and the lessons. And again, being intentional about capturing those so you don't make those same mistakes again, because you will make mistakes, as we all know. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think, Abby?
My employer thanks you greatly. I mean, I think that is great advice. That's the way that I think about it too, is that it's best to start small, especially if you're doing something on your own and, you're putting your own money into it for these kinds of things. So yeah, I think that's a great approach, just to start smaller and it's smaller to learn how to manage all of the different moving parts that are related to a development project. because I'm, as Kevin knows, I'm working with a nonprofit organization on a pretty big project, and I can't imagine doing that myself. I'm assisting with it, but it's a huge project, and I'm learning a lot from that process. And as I'm thinking about a project that I might want to do, I'm scaling it way back to like little old me. Like, what could I do, realistically?
Well, and your employer should thank you, because I think just the process of going through development, I think you get so much more credibility and value for your clients.
Yeah.
There's this switch that flips when suddenly, when you sign a personal guarantee, there's a whole different way of seeing the world. And it's great to pontificate and talk academically about the way things should be. But when you suddenly realize the time, money, exposure balance, it just gives you don't have to give up on those ideals, but it just gives you a new perspective of how to.
Well, I think it makes you better.
It does.
That's what occurred to me. Like watching your presentation last night, and I'm looking at the floor plans and the site plans and everything. And it occurred to me that, like, when you do that work and you're the developer too, it just makes you so much better as a designer, because you're really understanding the complete problem that you're trying to solve. I remember it kind of took me back to years ago. I built a house that was one of the designs my old firm had, and I ended up, I bought the house and I lived in it for several years. And I always told other architects, like, every architect should have to live in their own house design.
Yeah.
Because it is the most humbling thing you'll ever have to deal with. Because you live there and you're like, what the hell was I thinking? Why did I do this bathroom this way? Why did I but it's a great education in really learning how to design for other people too, and balance all the financial constraints.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think that it makes you better as a designer, but I also think because you're a designer, you bring things to the table and the quality of space and how things function that a developer wouldn't see. And so I think it is a two-way street that's, there's an incredible amount of value to being created in both ways.
Yeah. So, I did love this one quote. I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about it. I wrote this down that you said last night. It said, "Real estate should be the noble profession to solve a lot of our ills of today."
Yeah, I mean, it's I look back to when I started Urban Green, which was kind of my first shingle as my own consulting practice, and the mission statement was something like to prove that real estate development is a constructive endeavor for the human, urban, and rural environment. And I've always felt that real estate as developers, if they were looking through the right lens, which was not just financial engineering, but you are the creators of places. And I often tell students, real estate's the only asset class. I mean, there's bonds, there's equity, but they're kind of ephemeral and you don't really know what they are. But real estate touches people every single day, and it affects their emotions, it affects their livelihood, it affects their quality of life. And we have a responsibility to do it well, and we ought to be recognized for the important role we play. But unfortunately, I think because it has been commoditized and institutionalized, and remote Excel jockeys in New York who've never been to a site are driving the built environment instead of people who really live in the community, care about the community, care about like how this fits in and will heal that block or activate this corner. So I think the small scale movement has really been the opportunity to bring that connection back. And because I often talk about, small scale development is hyper local. I mean, I only work in places I can ride my bike to, and the nooks and crannies of where value can get created versus somebody that's developed their GIS model in some remote location and then does their search and say, oh, this is a perfect corner, at this intersection. So I just think that there's, the opportunity to be much better than we have been over the last 2-3 decades. But the other piece of it is, I think anybody who is a builder, a real estate developer / builder, we want to get stuff done. We're not happy with it just sitting on the shelf. And so you do fight the good fight. You have that tenacity. Okay, I got told no at commission. I'm going to go back and I'm going to figure out how. And you wonder, why do people keep doing this year after year after year? But there's a certain passion about, I'm going to be the one that's going to solve this problem. And I want to do it because I want to get something built. So that's very different than a lot of other people that just want to form committees and write another manifesto. So
Monty Anderson, who's a developer out of South Dallas, says that he's addicted to drama, and that's why he keeps doing it. I wanted to ask you a bit about kind of the overall movement for small scale development, because obviously there's so many different like initiatives and people that are in this space. You have your small scale forums, there's Incremental Development Alliance, there's Neighborhood Evolution, Strong Towns, CNU. Like there's just so many people in this space, and there's some talking, but not, I feel like there's a lot of opportunity to formulate better partnerships and be effective in that way. What are your thoughts on kind of the overall movement and how it's working or not working, or if the shared language is working together and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a loaded.
I'm the queen of loaded questions.
That's the queen of loaded. Okay, queen of loaded questions.
Yeah.
So I think, as I shared with you the other day, we made an effort to do that. So in 2015, on the front end of the Strongtown Conference in Louisville, we convened what was called the first small scale summit, and it was about 13 people: John Anderson, Chuck Moran, Jim Kumon, Patrice Frey, Chris Coase from Locus. We had Greenbuild there. Anyways, it was a large group. And so we got together under the proposition that we don't need to all sing for the same song sheet. We don't all need to be, writing a manifesto. But if we could create a similar set of principles or ideals that we would put out there collectively, we may have better impact faster. And this really grew out of my observation. So I grew up in the design profession in the 80s and 90s, and I watched how the new urbanists and the green development folks and the smart growth folks and the transit-oriented folks were all fighting each other to be the ones that were going to save the world. And instead of creating a collective solution that got great traction, we confused the audience that needed to hear the message the most. And so there's jargon and there's competition and big personalities. And so the goal was, okay, small scale is a virtuous, valuable approach. And in 2015, I thought whose time was right, because we had this world where you had baby boomers and millennials, who were the two ends of the dumbbell demographically, who both wanted the same thing. They wanted walkable urbanism. They wanted places that had that granularity. They were tired of the big same old. And so there was an opportunity to not only do the virtuous thing, but actually capture the market if we did it right. So anyways, long story short, we tried for 3 years, never really took root. And I think it's a little bit challenging, because by nature, this is a very entrepreneurial, very scrappy kind of ethos anyways. And the minute you balkanize it with a nonprofit or an institution or some kind of a collective manifesto, you're going to have a group that's going to spin off because they don't like the yoke that you create to rein them in. And I've wrestled with that a lot between the book and the Small Scale Developer Forum and Small Coach. It's like, okay, do I need a nonprofit? Do I need a board? It's like, no, I don't want to do any of that, because it works the way it works. It's a little messy, but it's okay. It works. And there is that energy and that contribution that people are making on their own. And so I do think it would be nice to have some consistency, like I said, in terms of the audience that we're trying to reach. And that audience, needs to be the capital markets. It needs to be the regulatory environments. If we're all saying similar things or sharing the lessons from each other, as opposed to being the ones that have kind of cracked the code on small, my way of doing small is better than your way of doing small. Exactly. And I feel like there's a little bit of that going on right now. So.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to herd a bunch of outdoor cats.
It is.
Exactly.
And that's what you get, especially in real estate. Because like you said, almost everybody's an entrepreneur. And entrepreneurs are really difficult to wrangle. So for a lot of things.
Yes.
What else? You got anything else, Abby? Do you
No, I
have
mean,
a wrap-up question?
I think that's why that is the value, I think, of having like a Strong Towns or CNU, where there is kind of a manifesto and some principles, but the incremental small scale development world and movement is kind of part of it, but also doing things in their own way. And I think that's the beauty of this being a very entrepreneurial, bottom up kind of approach. You're going to get all kinds of ways and lessons learned of doing small scale development. And that's really what we want, because it's a work in progress. There is no right way to do this.
Yeah. And I also think you create an affinity. And I think there is, I mean, it's the thing that I'm probably most proud about the small scale forum is the connections that people have with each other, not only the work that they're doing, but so when we did the conference in Bend in May, I mean, there was not, you go to a conference and there's usually people that, it's the first time I've been there, and they're kind of standing in the, there was nobody standing around by themselves, and they're small by design, so they are more intimate, but people really connect and share and, feel like they've really found their tribe and stuff like that. And I think it's a group that really enjoys being with each other. And there may be some other groups that, have a different chemistry, but that fits better with that individual and that, their kind of operating style. So I think that's a big part of it, is finding groups that you're comfortable, because this stuff is really hard. You might as well find a place where you can have some fun with the people that are doing it.
And you kind of need a support group.
You need a support group.
You really do. Yeah. Because it's a challenge.
It's a self-help group. That's what I call small developers of Kansas City. It's just like a monthly meeting.
Yeah,
self-help.
It is.
We call it part training, or we call the forums part training and part moral support. So
love it.
Well, I don't know if you do your own logos or if you have somebody for you, but I love the one that you did for Kansas City with the bowl.
Oh, so, good.
I think that's.
Yeah, I have a woman, shout out to Kim Dow in Healdsburg, California, she's done all of the recent ones for me. So we usually try to do something iconic in the location we're going to and make it kind of fun and playful. So
people here have like a love-hate relationship with the Cowtown image.
I'm sure.
But I actually think it's great.
I
always feel like just embrace it. It's who we are.
Right.
It's who people think we are.
Exactly.
Just, embrace it and move on.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm like the person that was like, I don't understand the bowl, like the Cowtown. You just explained it to me. So
there you go. That's a Cowtown thing. Yeah. There was actually for a brief period of time a group that tried to do like a running of the bulls thing through downtown.
Pamplona.
Through downtown Kansas City, there was a group that did it, and then it like got totally out of control like one year, so they stopped doing it.
They should have done that when they closed the North Loop for construction.
Oh God, that would have been great.
That would have been great. You could watch it too.
Yeah. Do you want to do a down zone, Abby?
Yeah. So on my podcast through Strong Towns Upzoned, we usually do a down zone, which is a part of the show where we can talk about anything that we've been doing outside of this. Could be something you're reading, some music that you've been listening to, activities, whatever has been kind of filling your time these days. So I'm going to put Kevin on the spot because I think we just threw that out. Yeah. We threw that at you. So Kevin, I'm going to pass it to you
Give
first.
Jim a minute to think about it.
Totally.
Well, that a lot of different things always, but as I've talked about before, I read a lot of just novels to kind of unwind, and I have my oldest sister Cindy has an incredible like personal library that I tap into all the time. Lately, the ones that she's been feeding me are novels by Jeffrey Deaver, really good, talented writer. If you like sort of murder mystery or all sorts of types of things, that he's just an excellent writer. That's one thing. The other thing that we talked about briefly, that from a pure entertainment standpoint, was the most interesting new show that I have watched in a long time was The Three Body Problem on Netflix.
Such a good show.
Great.
It blew my
show.
mind.
Yes.
Like, if you have not watched this show,
I have not. So
I so
always looking for good stuff.
It.
Yeah.
It's
It is.
crazy.
The Three Body Problem.
Three Body Problem.
It's crazy.
Sort of it's a sci-fi thing.
Yeah.
Very cool, very compelling, really, really well done.
It's so good.
And it's going to be, this was like season 1. It's a book or a series of books. And so this is like the first season of it.
I don't really read sci-fi, but I would consider reading these books just because how good the show was. It blew my mind.
Very cool. All right.
I guess I'll share. So I bought a house back in May. This is the second house that I've had. And I did some work to it before moving in and a little bit more after I moved in. And now I'm like getting to the exterior of the property, which is great. The yard was like a complete disaster. And I acquired 200 bricks on Facebook Marketplace for a really good price.
What do 200 bricks on Facebook Marketplace cost?
50 cents a brick.
Okay.
So yeah, it was a pretty good price because usually they're like $1 a brick.
And you had to go pick them up?
Yes, with my Acura. I know the guy was like, "What? Why are you doing this to your car?" And then when I started driving, I'm like, "Oh no, I'm destroying my car." But I think it's fine. I think nothing. Yeah. It's been a couple weeks.
Did you put them all in one load?
I did. Yep. I know. I don't think through things always. So like this is like,
sometimes it's a good thing. That can be a real art. That's good.
I know. I saw them and I was like, I'm gonna go buy these. Called up my friend during the workday and was like, hey, do you want to go pick up 200 bricks with me after work? She's like, she's an architect. She's like, yes, absolutely. Yeah. I would love to. So yeah, I'm kind of now getting into this project of like laying them out and creating the path and feeling into how I want the path and how I want everything to be laid out. And I think this weekend I'm borrowing some machinery and I'm gonna like start working on it. We'll see. It's going to be like 100 degrees, so we'll see.
It's a hot week.
Once I start something, I like have to get it done. I can't wait until the fall. Like I have to get it done now. So we'll see.
That's a good attribute as well for a small developer.
Yeah. Yes and no.
So, I'm trying to think. I spent so much time in this space. It's hard to have and when you love it so much, it's hard to like separate the personal non-work things from the work things. Yeah. But like you, I just started another project, which is, it's a house that we've had for 5 years and we literally just lifted it. So I don't know if you saw my post on building small, but we lifted it and I took videos. We lifted it and moved it. So we moved it 5 feet in each direction, lifted it 10 feet because we had to replace the foundation. And by doing that, it unlocked a bunch of potential for an ADU and some other things by creating a lot of additional space. There was this tight lot, so it gave us a lot of value there. So, And then the other thing that I haven't even told my wife yet, but she doesn't listen to these, so I don't have to worry. But last night I've been wanting to teach myself to watercolor for years, and I dabble, but I don't do very well. And it's like I just need to go somewhere and do it. So there's this guy that I follow who actually has very good instructional, and my daughter bought me like a 5 set of tutorials for Christmas one year, which was quite sweet. But he just put up a 10-day trip to Sicily for 14 students. Ooh. And so as I was at the hotel last night after our thing, I just bought myself one.
No way.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. That's in May, but it's pretty exciting. And it's staying at a villa and it's working with him directly and 13 other people. And it was a pretty darn good price, all your meals and everything else. So we'll see how that goes.
That's brilliant.
Sounds like a horrible experience.
I figured it's the only way. There's a little bit of like real estate school. The only way I'm going to do it is if I just drop everything and go, because if I try to do it like part-time, I won't do it. So
that's amazing. So I'm a painter and
that's right. Yeah.
I'm self-taught, and my process has been to literally go to the art store and ask employees how to do things. And they always have great advice. A lot of them are art students.
Yeah.
But I've never heard of anything like that. And now I'm going to definitely be looking into like international.
She might be joining
2 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm not into watercolor, so I like acrylic and charcoal, but yeah, maybe.
Well, there's that program Urban Sketch. I'm sure you've heard of that, and they do those trips abroad. And there's a couple of pretty well-renowned, urban sketcher, watercolorists for urban, renderings and stuff like that. And they'll do those like week-long trips and stuff. That's pretty,
all right, I'm
pretty
cool.
Into
this.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Well, Jim, maybe I'll become a painter.
I got a question.
Full-time painter.
Can I ask you all a question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So we asked this last night, but like I'm bringing 80 people to Kansas City that have never been here before that are interested in small scale development. So what should they see?
Oh boy.
Kevin's got a project.
They can come see our project. Sure.
Yeah. It's under construction.
It's not terribly
in Columbus Park?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's in Columbus Park. It's sort of, I would consider more of like a middle scale, it's not something for like a rookie that they're going to do. It was about an $8 million project.
Where is it? I was just up there this morning walking around. So.
Pacific and Troost, and it's is the corner that it's on. It's got 10 townhomes along the street that we're selling, and then there's 10 apartments
Oh
behind
yeah,
it.
is it WH? What's the realtor?
Yeah.
Yeah. I walked by it this morning. I saw
Yeah.
it because I was looking on. Is it Helix? Was
Yes.
the architect? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and that'll be wrapping up here this fall.
Okay.
So we're hopefully going to move people in the apartments in September, pending some site construction issues. So that's, I mean, I'm more than happy to show anybody that project. And I'm sure my partners would love to as well. There's a lot of really cool, small scale stuff in the area that we call Crossroads. And a lot of that is adaptive reuse.
Right.
Really clever adaptive reuse for any number of things. That area has gotten popular enough now that they're also getting, the typical like 5/1s and the big scale stuff. But what really got it started was all the small scale stuff.
Yeah.
And there's still a ton of that around. And Kansas City has enough commercial buildings, especially stuff that was more or less kind of like vacated for years, that there's still a ton of really cool stuff like that going on. I think that's small scale. So I think that is one area where you can really see a lot of good stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Crossroads, the West Side, has some cool little buildings where there's interesting things happening. I don't know if you would consider this middle scale, but I'll give a shout to Shamari Benton and Tim Dugan, who they redeveloped the old public works buildings, the historic public works buildings, and we drove by those yesterday. That's
the one down by 18th and Vine?
Yes.
Yeah, I saw that again today. Yeah.
Stone buildings.
Amazing
they house,
buildings, yeah.
The Vine Street Brewery, which Kimmett Coleman is running. And so that's a great project that I would highly recommend if you want to go get a beer and see a cool building. It's beautiful.
Cool. I'm totally blanking right now. What's the cool little bar on the west side off Southwest Boulevard with the Airstream trailer out front?
That's Ryan Gale's property.
The one that's open air.
Yes, it's called Panther Place.
Panther's Place.
Yeah, Panther Place is a great.
Which I was just there.
It's like one of my favorite bars. Yeah.
I mean, it's really a very clever example of utilizing a lot of underutilized outdoor space and creating a cool environment. They're not open all the time, but they're open, when the weather's good and weekends generally. But I love that. I took Andrew there for the first time, and they were like, him and his wife, they were blown away by how cool it is.
And there's a lot of really cool stuff that is happening on Truce Avenue as well. There's Ruby Jeans.
I was just there for
okay, great.
Lunch.
Yeah, you saw this.
Yeah,
right?
I saw that. So
and just down the street, I think around like 55th Street, there's a block that's kind of been coming back. It has an ice cream shop. It has some smaller apartments that were built. I think it's called Scholars Row, which is more middle scale, but there's a bunch of like old historic buildings with small businesses that are being renovated in that area. So there's a lot of like pockets of things happening.
Yeah, and the one last thing I might say, like just across the state line in KCK, quite a few years ago now, I worked with the former planning director, and we did a narrow lot design ordinance. KCK has a whole lot of like 25-foot residential lots. And that enabled the construction of a lot of narrow homes over there. So over the last, decade and a half, there's actually been a nice little grouping and an amount of small scale new construction homes on very narrow lots that are worth seeing, and some really great examples, some okay examples, but I think we're in a place where we've seen more in this region, just because of the nature of what's here, more like small scale adaptive reuse of commercial stuff.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot of really clever small scale new construction. There's some of that. There are little projects I can think about here and there, but there's not as much. I think a lot of that is just regulatory complexity.
Yeah. There's a lot of renovation work.
Yeah.
Are the costs, replacement costs for new are above probably what you can buy some of these buildings for and renovate? Yeah,
that's part of it. We have a funny construction market in that for residential new construction, it's more expensive here than it is in a lot of other markets. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of that is we really don't have any big national builders here. So the entire market is driven by the subcontractors. And so everybody in Kansas City who calls themselves a builder is probably just like a guy with a pickup truck and a cell phone, and so you just don't get a lot of price, premium on new construction, and it makes it kind of a challenge. So in markets where you can deliver that and get good rents or good sales, it'll work. But if it's too tough to build or get through from a zoning or entitlement standpoint, then a lot of it just doesn't happen. So it's interesting, but
it seems like there's a lot of stock. There's a lot of building stock.
There's a ton of historic building
Yeah.
stock that is.
I mean, some beautiful buildings.
Yeah, there's like lifetimes of work.
Yeah,
existing buildings.
Yeah, Abby's
it's incredible.
right. There are,
even in like the Crossroads district.
Oh, God,
there's still so much.
And there's so much on the east side of the city that could be bought and renovated there that for decades to come if we could get enough momentum going. So
great.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been a lot of fun.
It was really fun, and glad it all came together. So thank you both for putting it together and making it happen.
All right.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks.